Good day, good morning, good evening, wherever you are, Beatles fans. This is Mark here. I'm having to put this little bit of audio at the start for YouTube's terms and conditions, really. Otherwise, it will just look like I have just downloaded something from YouTube just to re-upload it to YouTube, which is not the case. I've had this on my laptop for, I don't know, I'm going to say about 8 or 9 years. It's an old laptop. As soon as I can afford another laptop, trust me, you'll be seeing me on camera. So you need to get used to my voice anyway. I've said this in my previous video. It's not just going to be Beatles footage, Beatles demos, Beatles interviews. And I know a lot of it isn't on YouTube anymore, so I'm hoping nothing gets struck. But it is going to be my voice as well, because it's going to be a podcast. I've had this planned long before 2020, before I got poorly. Now everybody knows what happened with the last channel, and I emailed Yoko Ono, and Yoko Ono said, send me the URLs of the videos, or somebody in Yoko Ono's office said, send her the URLs of the videos, and to get the strikes lifted. But I was so poorly, I didn't do it, so I'm rebuilding this channel from scratch, but I want it to be different this time. It's going to be a podcast as well, so you need to hear my voice anyway, and plus, you're going to be seeing me on camera too, unfortunately. So I hope you all had a great Christmas. I hope you all have a wonderful new year. I'll be uploading more or less every day, sometimes more than once, in the next year and hopefully years to come. I hope you all enjoyed this. This is from 1995. It's kind of an introduction to the then upcoming Beatles Anthology series.
I had a vision when I was 12, and I saw a man on a flaming pie, and he said, you are Beatles with an A, and we are.
It is the Beatles story.
Paul, George, and myself, and old footage of John, of course, and audio of us telling how we felt it was like to be a Beatle.
Everybody else and his uncle, seems to have written or talked about the Beatles story.
We've heard it from everybody else. Now you can hear it from us.
Although it is difficult when 4 people are telling the story, because it's actually 4 different stories. I mean, you must realize it's got to be somewhat of a compromise when 4 people are involved. But we're trying to just say how it felt to us.
We thought it might be good from the inside out rather than from the outside in.
It is the greatest pop music story ever told.
It's their lives, really, the travelogue of that period.
It's like looking into an old scrapbook, but it's coming to life most vividly.
Not everyone thinks that the Beatles are the 20th century's greatest romance, but I believe they are.
It was fun. It was good because enough time had gone between 1969 and now. The kind of the Beatles had gone away, and we'd all had enough time to breathe, and I think it's much easier to look at it now from a distance.
It's just amazing to me because I'm still here, and it's me looking at that story. And it's a question of, is that me? Was that us? God, we were so young.
Yesterday, love was such an easy game to play.
Everybody's very passionate about it. It's a hell of a venture, it really is.
You forget about the power of the Beatles, right? And I walked into a room about 3 months ago to interview Paul, George and Ringo, and the 3 of them were sat there. And to see the 3 of them sat there together, this was like frightening. It's okay interviewing one Beatle. When you get 3 of them there, you're the outsider.
Well, the 3 of them together are very funny, very sarcastic. At Liverpool, hard edge. And they talked very, very openly about themselves and told a lot of stories.
I think what's funny about it is this is the closest you'll ever get to the truth from all of them, I think.
Because it's strange, because we can interview the guys and, they'll talk in great length, give us a load of information, but sometimes you'll find a bit of audio which John recorded years and years ago. It'd be like 3 sentences, and in those 3 sentences you feel as though he left it behind, as if to say, look, when you're doing this project, which you're going to do it eventually, you're going to need this bit.
It's been something to be part of.
Love you, yeah, yeah, yeah. She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah. She loves you, yeah.
the main gist of it is, with the music, to find the most ancient Beatle music possible and come in chronological order through the various other records we'd made and bring it up to date, up to now.
Nowhere else do you see a performance of I'm the Walrus. That's the only performance ever.
And now we're going to play a track from Magical Mystery Tour, which is one of my favourite albums because it was so weird. And it's I Am the Walrus. It's also one of my favourite tracks because I did it, of course, but also because it's one of those that has enough little biddies going to keep you interested even 100 years later.
The first one's really exciting because there's a lot of stuff, you know, from old tape recorders of George, George on some, but Paul and John messing around, you know, singing and playing guitars.
And then it goes up, I think, into our Hamburg material that we recorded a couple of songs for Polydor. And then there's some Decca audition.
Well, we got turned down. You can kind of see why, but you can kind of think,
Oh, it just keeps on coming. There's a lot of very early years, but stuff that hasn't been heard.
Just kicks. And it kicks. It's so great, you know. And then we get into the records themselves and we get into sort of cross-fading, like, you know, take 1 to take 4. So, and on some of them where, you know, we were just working the song out, you know, still running through it because we always ran through the song. We very seldom stayed, you know, sat around, like when the tape was running, said, oh, let's do this and that, like run it down. And so the attitude it was like at the beginning to 7 takes later, it's just like a mile, you know, it's not like, oh, we've changed, you know, a note. I mean, we changed the whole thing and working on it, changing it. And so there's some of that cross-fading on, which is really exciting.
And we've tried to create a lot of the most famous songs, but totally different versions of them.
and you can see our development. You can see it happening on the CDs.
It was always down to the music. You know, the music is the Beatles.
I'm trying to tell the story of the Beatles' lives in music. It traces their lives from the moment they met to the moment they split up in 1970. So my job is to try and give people an idea of that, what that is, by means of CDs. Now, the way I'm doing that is to draw upon any source that I think is viable. That is, live performances, broadcasts, television shows, all the stuff we did together at EMI, all the recordings prior to that, the auditions they did, private recordings, all sorts of things. And it's been a kind of voyage back in time. This was the very first time we heard A Day in the Life in the studio. And we didn't use this. This was the first version. The master came a bit later. And this is the version without Paul's middle bit and without the orchestra. And John is just singing it, really, for himself. And I think it's charming. And I'm going to put it out. Okay, Paul, let's have a listen.
Sugar Plum Fairy, Sugar Plum Fairy.
Sugar Plum Fairy.
I read the news today, oh boy.
You know, you went to see those movies with Elvis or somebody in it when we were still in Liverpool, and you'd see everybody waiting to see him, right? And I'd be waiting there too. And they'd all scream when he came on the screen. Right? So we thought, that's a good job. The thing that makes the Beatles probably the most special and important group is that, well, one, they're probably the only group in the world that everybody knows the names of all the members of, still to this day. And they haven't made a record for 25 years.
Whenever I think about music, like pop music or rock music, whatever you want to call it, that there was all these groups, and then there was the Beatles, you know, just sat on the top, and everybody else was sort of good and great, but the Beatles were the Beatles, and it was a whole different thing.
They looked right, they sounded right, and the songs will last forever.
They were unique. They were a unique combination of talents, and spearheaded by two of our greatest songwriters ever. But the two of them weren't just the Beatles, there were four of them. And the four of them, united, became much more important than the individual people. So that the sum was greater than the individual parts. And I think the Beatles were an extraordinary phenomenon of our time.
This is a miracle. This whole Beatles thing has always been something of the miracle.
The Beatles. That's it.